committee members in attendance, and Alder McElhenney has been excused for tonight's meeting. We have another meeting coming after ours, 6 o'clock, is it? And so I really want to make sure that we move ourselves along, and Alder Rasmussen also needs to leave earlier than that for another thing. So let's just try to keep her moving. All right. And happy Fat Tuesday, everybody. First item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our 2/1/22 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes? I have from Watson. Do I have a second? I have a second from Killian. Is there a concern, Mr. Alder Killian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No concern, but I believe that, let's see, on page 4 of the PDF, labeled page 2 at the bottom, it mentions, quote, Killian being the dissenting vote, but it shows an approval of 4-0. So could my vote be included? I seem to have disappeared. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Good catch. All right. Anything else on the minutes? Seeing nothing, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Moving along, item number 2, discussion and possible action on approving new standard deed restrictions. And who's going to take the lead on that?
Randy Pfeifrick, our Economic Development Manager, will take the lead on that.
All right, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
You bet.
So this has been an ongoing task that we've talked about for some time now. I think the initial discussion started on this in December, and we've been working with the Attorney's Office, planning staff, a number of different staff around the city on this. But what you see in front of you in your packet is a copy of the current deed restrictions, which, interestingly, on our next agenda item we'll be talking about, really have remained unchanged in a lot of aspects since 1990 at least. Looking at some of the issues, and one of the things that I noticed in coming here was in December specifically, there was a couple of different property owners that were exchanging property within the business campus and coming forward to the city in order to get that first right of refusal taken care of. From the perspective of how much we want to be involved, the amount of time we want to be involved, how much time you want to be involved with your meetings, really the most important thing in that, at least from my perspective, is that land or that property being transferred is staying with a tax-paying entity. With the tax increment dollars, the different incentives that are given out, it's important that we're getting that return on that property. So as long as it's not going to a non-tax exempt or a tax exempt entity, I don't know that that's in our purview to be concerned about. Another item on there that noticed in going through it was a requirement for when leases or new tenants were coming into multi-tenant buildings, that they were coming forward to get your approval on that. Based on just general ownership and the amount of different tenants coming in and out of properties, really didn't see that as the best use of time and resources as well. Just kind of getting back to the importance of keeping as a tax-paying entity and making sure that our revenues are continuing to come in. Initially, we were proposing to bring this forward with track changes on it. Honestly, by the time we got done with it, you'd have had about 10 pages of red and cross through everything. So this is what's being brought forward. It still keeps the commencement completion date requirements. That was something that we acted on, I believe it was last month, in the case where somebody wasn't able to start their project on time. Has that provision in there that if they don't start on time, that we have the ability, if they don't plan on moving forward, to purchase that property back. So happy to take any questions, as well as Attorney Jacobson.
Thank you. Anybody have any comments from the committee? Sounds pretty straightforward. Alder Rasmussen.
It does, and I think the fact that some of that has been cleaned up as far as to clarify some of the things that we wanted to see cleared up as well. I would make a motion that we approve the new deed restrictions.
Very good. Thank you. Is there a second to that move? Alder Killian gives us a second. Further discussion? Alder Killian?
Just one question. I think it's essentially been covered. So this was kind of reviewed and approved by the city attorney's office as well then?
Yes, absolutely. We worked hand in hand with them on moving this forward.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Very good. Seeing no others, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to number 3, related sort of subject, termination of recorded deed restrictions and recording set of revised deed restrictions for 715, 717, 719, 721, and 723 South 72nd Avenue. Randy?
Yes, and this comes really along the same lines as what we just talked about with those new deed restrictions. Jason Armani, who's the manager of R3JS3 LLC, bought a property at 715 to 723 South 72nd Avenue in December of 2021. He had approached staff at that point about removing the deed restrictions on that property. And working through the process we just went through, we said, well, let's wait on this. We're going to be going through and making some revisions to this. And once we have that, then we can start working with you to see what existing things that are in place that can be removed. So specifically from those restrictions that we just talked about, were those commencement completion dates. Well, they've got an existing building there that really doesn't make sense that, since there's already something there, that we would have that in place. So there's things like that we had removed. And Jason is online on WebEx, so I think he wants to make some comments as well. Really the one item that we have, and I printed out a copy that Jason had sent over today about one area where we don't have agreements on, and that would be number 11 on there. And I think I'll let Jason take over if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Go ahead, Mr. Armani.
All right, thank you very much, Randy. I appreciate it. Randy and I have been working on this document, and I see no issues whatsoever. The building was built, 20 plus years ago at this point. And really, I just want to bring everyone's attention to item number 11. And this is what I was hoping that we might be able to have a revision on. There's really, the main reason, the way it's written right now, is it gives the city basically the unilateral ability to do anything it wishes with this parcel. And as a homeowner, as anyone that owns property can understand, that's very unnerving, right? It's an extremely broad and onerous provision on a piece of a parcel that has already been built on. And so, as I've talked to Randy and trying to understand the city's concern for what might happen, I think the biggest thing that Randy and I could come up with is that potentially the city might one day need an easement of some sort, and of course, the city would not want to have to pay for an easement if it didn't have this overarching language. And so what I'm proposing would be to basically give the city the unilateral ability by resolution to have an easement, so that way this language could be a little less restrictive. That would be my hope that we could accomplish here.
Thank you. So the verbiage we see highlighted on our handouts here, is this the city's desired alteration, or is this Mr. Amrani's?
Yeah, this came to us from Mr. Amrani. We've looked at it and really believe it's really a decision for the committee on which direction you want to move forward. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind that, I didn't feel comfortable making changes to it since it was contained both in those 1990 and 96 documents that came forward. If you feel comfortable in this, we've talked with the attorney's office as well. If this is something you feel comfortable with in going this direction on this, we'll make the administrative changes to it and move forward. But since this would be significant.
If I could interject, all we're trying to do for number 11 is strike where it says provide for other future covenants, regulations, restrictions, and or encumbrances to the land, or they may exempt the land. The reason why I think that's important for anyone who owns a piece of property is it would make sense if this land had not been built on. And at this point, this property has been built on for a long time. What this allows the city to do is basically say at any point in time, you can change the rules for a homeowner and for a property owner. And I don't think that anyone would wish that upon themselves. So all we're asking is, the concern from what I understood from Randy was that, again, potentially the city may need an easement. Therefore, in order to address that, there's a portion that we've added that says the city may unilaterally in the future by resolution require the grantee to grant the city an easement needed for public purposes without any cost to the city, which would of course address the concern from the city.
And just to be clear, the example of an easement was one of the potential things that I could see coming up with from this language, and that might be applicable to the property.
Okay, I wonder if I could ask City Attorney Jacobson to come up and sort of give us a feeling for, what gave rise to, what we're talking about right now and where this sits in terms of standard practices and precedent, anything of that nature.
Those are all excellent questions.
Thank you.
These deed restrictions have been around as long as I've certainly been with the city. We've had numerous requests to change different ones over time, and those are some of the ones we addressed up front initially. I don't know if Randy looked at other people's. I looked at Portage County's business campus rules and took some good suggestions from theirs to incorporate into ours. I just don't know how strongly you all feel about having a uniform set apply to everyone in the business campus. I know it's scary to somebody to think that by resolution the council could change some kind of restriction or covenant on a piece of property in the business campus, but it is your business campus. I mean, I can't imagine what else you would need to change. I would agree with Randy, an easement might be one thing that he's already agreeing in advance to give, but the council would have to approve getting that from him anyway, so that's going to council no matter what. It is in, that number 11, unchanged, is in everybody else's deed restrictions at this time, but with that said, they're not all consistent anymore anyway, because you've seen people come through here, and recently we've waived the provision that required getting future permission to convey. Not only for that recent conveyance, but all future ones. So you decided as a body, that's okay. We don't need to know, as long as they're complying with their zoning ordinances and laws, and they have to comply with their zoning laws, and they have to be tax exempt. Those are sort of the main things we were looking at. And I think kept if they weren't building within 2 years now instead of one, that we'd want that option to repurchase the property. So, I mean, legally, obviously, it gives the city less power and authority over these pieces of land out there. I don't know how that was drafted originally or what the purpose for it was, other than just protection for the city. That whatever the council decided to do, you could impose on pieces of property out there just because it was our business campus. But if you all feel now that there's not necessarily that need, because I can't remember anything in 24 years that we have imposed by resolution that addressed every piece of property in the business campus. I don't think we've done that. So nothing has come to mind in that period of time. So I'm okay with it legally if you want to grant his request to him, but
Okay.
you may be entertaining more of these as more owners out there start to negotiate individual sets of deed restrictions with us.
You take them as they come.
Yep.
I don't think you can just set down verbiage that is going to stop that kind of, requests coming or concerns
Right.
arising. So,
Right.
Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I suppose we could consider stuff like this on a case-by-case basis, much like we consider the uniqueness of various projects and development agreements. I mean, they're not all necessarily cookie-cutter agreements anymore. I think the purpose of standard deed restrictions, though, is the operative word is standard. Like, everyone's is the same, and if they're not going to be the same, and, we're going to get to a point where we will, on a case-by-case basis, customize these things, then maybe what we should look at is maybe a wholesale amendment to number 11 to create something like this where it's, effective but less scary, and really a modification to the standard deed restrictions so that there's less push and pull with the wording that gets used. I think originally when the business campus was developed though, there was a serious movement to want to not only control the land use and the purpose, but to make sure that those sites, because they were limited in quantity, were used to the highest and best land use, and that tax base was maximized and that job creation was maximized, so that they were not just taking all comers to that particular area, because that area was meant to fill a niche. And often with types of businesses that don't fit in other places, like in the city core. So, I think that, without some kind of restrictions and control, I think an easement is a valid example, but, what happens if you had a business out there that, you had partnered on and it fails? And there's a need then at some point for the city to reclaim and remarket a parcel. I think we need the ability to be able to do that. And so if we can get to that by other means, perhaps through the clawback clause of a development agreement, we wouldn't need to have quite as many caveats in the standard deed restriction. So, I guess legally, if we're comfortable with it, but, I think if we're going to touch off this slope, that maybe we should just take a look at item 11 and, create something that's maybe a little more timely. And, then maybe we won't be seeing so many of those re-reviews, I
and
guess.
the problem with these is that I don't even counted the number of properties out there, but to go back and re-record a new set and get the owners to then agree to a new set would be a very involved, time-consuming process. So there might be some out there now that aren't complying with all the deed restrictions on their property, either
Okay.
willfully or inadvertently. Those that are represented by council, when they go to convey them or have them reviewed, know they have to contact us, and you've seen those folks come forward.
For sure.
Because we talked about that too. If we do a whole new set, are we going to go back and try to get everybody already currently out there on board with the new one, or bring them to their attention and then record revised sets for every single
You almost get to a point
property
where,
out there to keep the consistency? It's hard.
you almost get to a point where you have to have a grandfather date and go forward, because, I think that, to go back, years later and try to renegotiate the terms isn't necessarily fair either. But, I think we have kind of, like you said, with the conveyances, we've now kind of entered into this, case-by-case tailoring to a degree. If we're satisfied with the language on number 11, I certainly could live with that, but, I think if we see more and more and more, we're going to have to look at something that's, going forward is perhaps a little different.
So are you making a motion to approve the requested change, and also, second, also have staff go and look at number 11 to see how it might be tweaked for future reference?
I think for future use, and we'd have to set a grandfather date, because I certainly
Sure.
wouldn't expect them to go back and renegotiate with, 50 others, so.
Right, right, counterproductive.
But yes, so moved.
All right, thank you. Is there a second to that motion? Looking for a second. Watson is our second. Further discussion? Oh, yes.
And just
Randy.
one point to Alder Rasmussen's comment about the grandfather date. The intent is that we would use these moving forward. We wouldn't go back and try to work through, I think it's 80, 90 businesses at this point now.
Sure.
So that, from the time that this gets adopted, say March 8th, that we would use that going forward. And unfortunately, still have to handle some on a case-by-case basis.
Very good, thank you. Further discussion? Alder Killian.
A question for Mr. Amrani.
Yes, sir.
So with number 11, could you, in some detail, give us an idea of what your greatest fears are with that language? What is it you anticipate that the city may do in terms of those actions covered under that language that you are concerned or nervous about? Or is it just a perpetual state of uncertainty?
I think it's the latter, the perpetual state of uncertainty, and I hope that I'm not alone in that feeling, right? In that you would hopefully feel the same way, right? So the way I look at this and I say, we're going to comply with all these deed restrictions. This one little piece just basically gives an overarching ability for the city to basically be very onerous on an owner. And so I think this allows an owner to have a little more comfort and say, as long as I comply with the deed restrictions, we should be okay with this parcel. As opposed to just thinking one day something drastic could change.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anything further from the committee? All right, then, all in favor of the motion to approve the request, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Amrani. I think in the interest of covering the item number 7, our addendum on our agenda, to make sure that Alder Rasmussen will be here to be part of that, I would ask the committee if they felt it's okay to jump to number 7. I'm getting nods, okay. Number 7 is discussion and possible action on approving planning option extension request from T-Wall Enterprises District at Riverlife LLC. Director Brodick, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I also want to point out that Nick Patterson from T-Wall Enterprises is on the phone with us today, or on WebEx with us today, to answer any questions and clarifications. So thanks for being here, Nick. Appreciate it. So there are 2 memos that you have on this topic. One from me provided in your packet, and then another from Nick that was provided yesterday, but we had an email outage, as you all know, and so I provided a paper copy that you have today. To briefly recap the memos, this committee requested a planning option with T-Wall Enterprises at our December 7th Economic Development meeting, and a draft was brought to the January 4th Economic Development meeting that was approved unanimously 4-0. T-Wall contacted the city via Nick on February 9th to request to start testing via that planning option agreement, essentially, the week of February 21st. And then at the council meeting on the 22nd, the certificates of insurance were discussed for their subcontractors that would be doing the testing. And basically, there was a discussion about the need for satisfactory COIs before the testing could begin on 2/23. So Mr. Patterson and the subcontractors were immediately exchanging emails that night, back and forth, trying to provide these. Attorney Jacobson's thorough review of the COIs that were provided found more issues that could not be addressed in a timely manner. So Mr. Patterson and I had a brief conversation on the 24th in which he informed me that an extension of the planning option would be necessary to complete their due diligence. And then we had an opportunity for a more in-depth discussion on the 25th in which we discussed the specifics of extending the planning option to May 2nd, and then development agreement negotiation to September 1. The details of all of that, like I said, are spelled out in those memos.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Patterson, for joining us. I will invite you to have your say and explain anything you wish. But before we do that, just to put us into a sort of a context, Director, could you maybe give us a feeling like where we would have expected to be at this point, based on, when, T-Wall was first chosen for this project, way back, in the dark ages. What did we foresee going forward as to today? Where would we be in that process?
Well, to take it back to the very beginning of this process, I can't recall the exact month in which the RFP for the Riverlife lots 6, 7, and 8 were issued, but this committee decided, I believe in the April 2021 meeting, that they decided to go with T-Wall's response for that RFP. And then there was, and Attorney Jacobson, I know has more of the history on this, and she's here, so can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was a planning option that we sent to T-Wall Enterprises in May of 2021 that was not returned, if I recall correctly. And so we had been going back and forth with some development negotiations. I started in August of 2021, so I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details that were preceded me. But I think, overall, we're coming up on about a year of negotiations on this. So I think we can have expected generally to have seen a little bit more progress than we have. But this ultimately is up to the committee to decide what, how comfortable we are with the timeline that we are experiencing at the moment, and if there's, and ultimately what you would like to do with the extension.
Thank you. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. I know that, now we've been back and forth on this for coming up on 10 months. We still don't have a viable development agreement. And we talked about this in the meeting when the council approved the planning option in a March 1st deadline. That was no joke. As far as I'm concerned, we even asked, can you take soil borings in the winter months? Oh, yes, we can get this done by March 1st. And well, we're to March 1st and nothing's happening. And so I read this memo that we got today, and, they talk about unforeseen requirements. Well, certificates of insurance and proper documentation of one's insurance certainly should not be an unforeseen requirement. And the proper issuance of insurance documentation also is a common practice in the business world. This is not like a, caveat that's unique to Wausau. And so I feel like the riverfront as it sits today, that land is a limited commodity for us. I don't feel that there's any need to rush to develop it all immediately. I think what's down there is succeeding. I also think we can afford to be choosy when it comes to riverfront land. And, I'm kind of done with this because we're now to the deadline. And again, we don't have testing. We don't have a development agreement. And I feel like we need to, I guess, perhaps re-RFP this property, or at least give ourselves the ability to do that. And if T-Wall is able to gather themselves and their plan and they wish to re-propose, obviously they're welcome to re-propose with the others. But I feel like at this point, that we have a ton of staff time invested in all of this back and forth, and we can't come to even the simplest of legal agreements. And, this is a company that does big projects in big cities. None of this should be new, yet, we just can't get timely back and forth at all. And I guess I'm frustrated by that. I expected that we would be way further down the road. I expected that we would be ready to see construction happening this year when the frost came out, and we're nowhere near that point. So, I feel like, it's time for us to not extend the planning option any further. And, in the meantime, if there's other interested parties that are coming forward, we certainly can talk with those folks. And if we decide, either sooner or later to go out to another RFP, I don't think that needs to be next week, but I think, in the coming months, we should resurvey the market and see what else might be out there. And I just keep our options open, because this option has been sitting a long time and it's really stagnating, in my opinion.
Before we get to Mr. Patterson, Alder Rasmussen, would you like to form that in a motion?
Well, if
And we can have further discussion.
The item on the agenda is to approve an extension on the planning
Right.
option, so if
Right.
we don't want to do that, I think if we take no action, if we don't take action on an extension, it dies here, right?
Okay.
So today's the end of the line, March
Okay.
1st.
And the city attorney is nodding her head.
Is that the
So-
case? So I don't think we have to take action unless we want to give more time.
Right, okay.
So that's why I didn't make a motion.
And we'll see if anybody wants to make that motion after we hear from Mr. Patterson. Mr. Patterson, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I think Liz did a great job explaining that, the timeline and everything, and appreciate your comments. There certainly have been delays. There had been delays with site control. There had been delays with testing. That's really what's up in the air right now, is the questions of soil properties, contamination. We're aware that there's contamination, but we need to get a better grasp on how much, the locations. So we can certainly negotiate pieces of the development agreement now, but there's just a lot up in the air with soil conditions. So we're ready to start negotiating certain pieces of the development agreement, but there is still certain items that are up in the air. So the big piece here tonight is to build the authorization just to get on site and do the necessary testing and sampling. And the liability insurance, certainly a standard practice. We had engaged geotechnical services back in December, immediately once we had received approval of the planning option. And our regular provider, who we use for every single one of our projects, given their backlog, they could not even commit to submitting a proposal for this project because they had such a long backlog. So looking for other providers, we went to American Engineering Testing, who's familiar with Wausau, has worked with Wausau in the past. They said they could provide a proposal, do borings within a timely manner. And I had engaged them back in December, and I found out February 9th that the earliest they could get out to the site was February 21st. So as Liz said, I immediately notified the city, and we provided liability insurance on the 16th. And working with AET, I assumed that they would know exactly what the standards requirements were for that liability insurance. And I later found out that that was not the case. So anyways, we've been working behind the scenes with Ann Jacobson on providing the appropriate liability insurance, and we just simply couldn't get everything required by this March 1st deadline. But again, we can continue to work in the next week on meeting those requirements so we can get on site.
Okay, well, you're supposed to have accomplished drilling something like February 23rd, I think it was. Is that the date?
February 23rd was the earliest they could get on site
Right.
because they needed council approval.
Right, so, we're a few days past that. Deadline is today, and tomorrow, that's another day. But what we're talking about is days. And I look at the requested extension, and it takes us way down the calendar. It's not like an extension of days or a couple of weeks, just to get a couple of things ironed out. It's a pretty substantial change in our time frame. Can you explain to us what is feeding that large need of extra time?
Sure, yeah. So once we found out we didn't meet the requirements for the liability insurance, I notified our both providers, True North and AET, to hold. True North is in the Madison area. AET is nearby, so that wasn't as big of a deal. But they were ready to get on site that day, so they had already mobilized, and I told them, well, hold on, just pause, don't do anything. And then once I found out we didn't meet those requirements, I said, let's get off the schedule. We're hold until I give you authorization. So basically, we're not on their schedule. We have to get back on their schedule. So I'm really hoping that we can remedy the liability insurance and get back on the schedule within the next week or two, but I can't make any promises. I do not know. But I can tell you, once they complete the testing, which it'll be like a 5-day period when testing is completed. Once testing is completed, I can have a report in hand within 3 weeks. And then from there, it's going to take me probably just a week to complete my feasibility report. I'll run this by our general contractors. So I would say a week or two from there. And then I would say that's honestly all the time we need. It would be just getting back on the schedule. So more importantly is we would need the time for the development agreement negotiations.
So
Any scheduling we'd have to do would have to be probably attorney's office, planning. There's many different departments, and how things have been working now, everybody's 2 to 3 weeks out scheduling. So every meeting that needs to be scheduled is 3 weeks out from when any changes need to be made. So more importantly, I'd say we need the time on the development agreement. The planning option to access the site, I think we could get that completed in April.
Okay. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. My experience with development agreement negotiations, not even just with the parties involved, but if we employ outside counsel to draw up our agreements, that is not a couple-week process. That is a few-month process. And, as I've been through an awful lot of these projects, my expectation was that should have been happening between May of 2021 and now. We haven't even started. And, I guess I'm a little upset about that fact that, we are this far down the road, and the comment that we hear is, well, we can start negotiating parts of the development agreement. Oh, my God, where have we been all these months? And it can't only be about site control, and it can't only be about testing. I mean, we haven't even started a lot of this legal work, and if we're only willing to start to negotiate at this point, the other caveat is, why did we wait until 1 week before the deadline to even consider testing? We approved this March 1st deadline months ago. And if there was to be some back and forth and, there was issues with the proof of insurance and whatnot, that all should have been happening weeks ago, not last week in the 11th hour. I feel like that is just I don't know if it's an issue with time management or if it's an issue with project prioritization or what it is, but, Wausau and its projects needs to be as important as any other community involved in the mix of work that developers have. And, I just feel like this has gone long enough, and I'm not voting for any extension tonight.
Thank you. Director or city attorney, a non-vote tonight to extend, how does that affect then the viability of the project?
I would actually look to the city attorney for that guidance because I'm not familiar with that. And I do not want to tell you something incorrect.
I know it's in here. The planning option was in the packet, was it not? Why am I not finding it?
It is, and I can provide a
Yes, you
copy.
have it in your memo. So, under termination, so this is what happens. If the event the developer determines the proposed project is not feasible or otherwise does not desire to move forward, they may terminate the agreement by providing the city written notice thereof. In the event they provide no notice to proceed prior to the expiration of the planning option, the agreement shall automatically terminate. So during the period of the planning option, I think was up to, March 1, today until 5 p.m. So I think we're now just past that. So during that, we agree not to sell the property. We will provide them access. Upon a determination by developer that the project is feasible, they will then have the option to provide the city with written notice of their intent to proceed prior to the expiration of the planning option, which I believe did not happen.
There was actually, the letter from T-Wall came in on the 28th. We just weren't able to provide it because of the email.
Okay, so that you're
But-
counting this planning option extension request? Okay.
I know that that was the intention, but I also think that what we would perhaps be looking at in the termination is the city having the option to terminate with or without cause. Is that,
Yep,
correct
that's
me
the
if I'm
next
wrong.
sentence. Yep, city shall have the option to terminate this with or without cause upon at least 30 days written notice, and if without cause, will refund any payments made to the city for the planning option. So I would probably advise you that we would, if you wanted to terminate it, it doesn't sound like they want to terminate it at this point, nor have they given us written notice of that, or that the project's unfeasible, so we would have to send them a notice to terminate it in 30 days.
Thank you, city attorney. I think I've had two hands, now. I don't know which one was first. Alder Killian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would echo, I think, the sentiments of Alder Rasmussen. I think it's kind of, it's been a kick the can process, and the can's been kicked so long, I don't think there's much left of it. So I would make a motion to terminate.
I guess we can't really do that. We're just, what we would do is wait for a motion to approve the request, and if none comes, then it's de facto not approved.
Just one question on that, Mr. Chair. City Attorney Jacobson, you had mentioned about kind of some more explicit indication of termination, I had thought, or is it simply the clock runs out and that's sufficient?
I think we need to terminate it. I'd have to take a closer look at this. I was just provided this right as the meeting started myself.
So that may
So I'm
be a
looking back and
future
trying to answer-
agendized item, not
Yeah, I
covered
would say
under.
that motion would not be
Right.
covered by this agenda item. It's action on
Right.
approving a planning option extension, not on approving a termination of the planning
Yeah.
option agreement. So in all fairness, I would say that's.
It's always posed in the affirmative, so.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Alder Watson.
So I had a question about that last, line on number 3 for the termination. We wouldn't have any further obligations that would neither party except those which expressly survive. So would there be anything left over?
I'm not aware of anything that would expressly survive because we haven't entered into any agreements with them. So neither party should have been relying on another for anything.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, I'll just, before, I ask for a motion, I just want to state that, from the get-go, I've been a fan of this project. I think everybody on committee and council, for the most part, were very excited by the vision. What we're looking at was something that, that fit, our own vision, our own wishes for that property to a great extent. So that being said, I leave it up to the committee right now to come forward with a motion to approve the extension request. Once again, I'm looking for a motion to approve the extension request. And one is not forthcoming from the committee, so we will not take action on that item. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Patterson, and I don't know where this is going to go as we move forward between T-Wall and the city. As I said, we really liked the project, and I don't think the door is shut. So, thank you.
And just one quick closing comment on that. We did
Yes.
like the vision of the project. I think that we also like the energy and that it brought to the area. But it also came with a substantial public-private partnership ask. And I think along with that commitment by us, we are looking for something different in terms of timeliness and results. And that really is where the rubber met the road for me. I'd still love to see a project there. I'd love to see us reoffer the parcel. And if T-Wall wants to be one of the proposers, among a group of them, I'd certainly be willing to review a proposal again, but I just don't think we should continue to hold forever waiting.
Thank you. All right, it is 5:42. Alder Rasmussen, are you able to hang for a little while, or you need to? We have that one left.
And an update, but the
And an update?
update can wait until.
Okay. Well, let's move to item number 4. Update on rescinding prior resolution, number 12-0705, joint resolution of the Economic Development and Finance Committees approving the sale of the to-be-surveyed Wausau Business Campus expansion area land at 9500 to 9600 Innovation Way to Composite Envisions, or their assignee, and reverse tax increment financing, TIF payments for 2 years not to exceed a total of $49,000, adopted September 24, 2019. Director Brodick?
Yes, this is simply an update. This item was already approved at Finance on, the rescinding of that offer was approved at Finance on February 22nd. So this does not need any action in this committee. We just wanted to let you know that this is not moving forward, and we will now be offering the parcel to new parties.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, yes, it's still, oh, yes, sorry, I apologize. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney Jacobson. It does still have to go to council, but then once that's approved at council, we can offer it to new parties.
Okay, item number 5, set April meeting date. Just our usual.
Well, our usual is
No.
election day, right?
Exactly. So April 5th is
Yeah,
our
that's-
usual meeting date. The council chambers is reserved from noon to 8 p.m., so we need to find another meeting date for April.
Could we do the 6th?
Possibly, why don't you just canvass the committee on email and,
We could email for quorum, I guess, or send some possibilities, I guess, whatever.
yeah,
Okay, I will do that.
okay, very good. I thought I saw a hand in the audience. Mr. Denny?
Thanks, Tom. Doug Denny, 708 Fulton. And this hopefully is tangential to the T-wall discussion, termination. Am I to understand that's in TID District 12?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So potentially, is this termination potentially affect the long-term TID arrangement there? As if that TID is nearing or getting into distress level? As I understand, the budget shows that we're using a TID 7 as a donor to TID 12. So that wouldn't necessarily need to happen.
So Finance Director Grote, I see, is on WebEx with us. My understanding, and please, Marianne, if you are on, please jump in and tell me if I'm incorrect about this. My understanding is that TID 7 is donating to TID 12 for the demolition of the mall. So the property assessments take place at, the value is assessed as of January 1 of the year. So the value of the district would remain the same, is my understanding. But Mary Ann, please jump in and correct me if I'm misstating anything.
That's correct, that the donation is for the mall demolition.
Okay, so the mall is technically in District 12.
No, it's not. But you can spend in the half mile
Half mile,
boundary, and
okay.
it's actually donating to TID 8, which the mall is in, excuse me, the half mile boundary for TID 8.
Okay. Maybe a good opportunity to review our TIDs again soon. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, brings us to the end of our agenda. All I would ask for now is a motion to, Alder Watson. That's a motion to adjourn? Thank you. And I have a second from Killian. We are adjourned. Thank you. Could you